Welcome to the overview for the 2006 competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame. Shockingly, this video is a follow-up to the 2005 overview, and it's a supplement to the History of the Ban List video series, to add more context to the decisions on the ban list. The 2006 metagame is quite similar to that from 2005, with minor innovations and experimentation in my opinion. The tournaments are dominated by a few variants of Chaos or Warrior staple decks, which are sometimes lumped together as Chaos Control, but that is misleading, as many of these decks do not have Chaos payoffs like Chaos Sorcerer. Beyond that though, the different flavor cows have slightly different overarching strategies, with some focusing more on slowly accumulating resources, while others are more aggressive. Without well-defined archetypes, the game is dominated by a few handfuls of good generic cards, most of which have had a detailed explanation in previous installments. So the focus of this video will be on tech cards, at least when talking about the cows. So please forgive the inevitable redundancy. For each tournament, the first place deck will be examined, as well as any novel decks which top. Cows with interesting tech will be mentioned as well, but this has already been too much preamble. So let's get to SJC Durham. The top deck in SJC Durham was a mid-range cow. It played aggressive cards like Cyber Dragon, Chaos Sorcerer, Breaker the Magical Warrior, and even Mobius the Frost Monarch, although those last two monsters are general utility, offering a bit of spell and trap removal, as well as generating card advantage. Dikoichi the Battle-Chanted Locomotive, Dun Zalug, and Spirit Reaper also offer +1 in card advantage, with the first through drawing cards, and with the latter two by discarding your opponents. There's also a suite of 1-for-1 monster removal, with DD Warrior Lady, Exiled Force, Nobleman of Crossout, Smashing Ground, Bottomless Trap Hole, Sakuretsu Armor, and Widespread Ruin, which, when combined with these +1 generating cards, can chip away at your opponent's board without sacrificing too much tempo. This deck can have decently aggressive turns, but is also well suited for the longer game. For comparison, in the same tournament, there was a more control-oriented cow deck, which has been labeled Flip-Flop Control. There is a bit heavier flip effect monster lineup, the removal of Chaos Sorcerer, and the substitution of Bottomless with the standard Trap Hole. Pot of Avarice is also an indication of the deck being suited for a longer game, as it offers both card advantage and monster recursion, although only after the graveyard has been sufficiently loaded with monsters. I like the term flip-flop, so I will be using this as a subcategory of cows. Finally, there was one quite unique deck featured in Durham, Cyburn. Cyberjar helps to fuel this burn deck by not only wiping the board, but also setting burn monsters like Desk Koala and Stealth Bird, and drawing burn spells and traps like Wave Motion Cannon, Ceasefire, Just Desserts, Magical Cylinder, and Secret Barrel. Lava Golem is sort of a burn card, but is decent board disruption as well. Same goes for Ojama Trio. Then, as far as attack suppression, the lineup is pretty lean for this sort of deck with a level limit Area B and Swords of Revealing Light. Although Cyberjar is in the main deck, the Cyburn deck might be referring to the Cyberstein OTK kit in the side deck. Cyberstein can be tutored with Last Will. Then, after activating the effect to get out Cyber and Dragon, either Limiter Removal or Megamorph can boost the card to 8,000 attack points, and then Giant Trunade can bounce back spells and traps to make attacking safer. Cyberstein is one of the highest tempo plays in the game, and I am surprised that the card was not more prevalent at the time. I don't think that this was a simple supply and demand problem, like with Crush Guard Virus, but that big 5,000 life point cost was probably intimidating. Eventually, Cyberstein was not only adopted, but so popular it warranted an emergency ban. But I am getting months ahead of myself. Also in February was Pharaoh Tour Italy. The top deck was a full-fledged Cyberstein OTK deck. Supporting the OTK, there is Mystic Tomato as a tutor, Giant Trunade to bounce the opponent's back row, but also to bounce your Gravity Bind, Messenger of Peace, and Level Limit Area B to allow Cyber and Dragon to attack. And, most interesting in my opinion, double Iron Blacksmith Kotetsu to tutor Megamorph, but also Premature Burial in a pinch. As far as tech, Draining Shield can buy some time, but also put you back above 5,000 life points to activate Cyberstein's effect. Pettin the Dark Clown is decent for stalling and can be tutored by Mystic Tomato, but the card can miss the timing, preventing it from special summoning another copy of itself. Also placing in the event were a couple cows. This Heavy Chaos variant, which plays 3 copies of Chaos Sorcerer, has a few powerful deck thinning and graveyard setup cards. Thunder Dragon is a +1 in card advantage, when having drawn just 1 copy, and, importantly, puts a light monster into the graveyard. Magical Merchant is similar, netting a spell or trap from the deck, but also dumping monsters into the graveyard, especially since this deck has such a high monster count. A playset of Pot of Avarice is another major payoff for the graveyard setup, but outside of triple Royal Decree for trap suppression, the deck is similar to what we have seen so far. There was also another flip-flop deck in the event, with the only difference worth mentioning being an Apprentice Magician flip effect suite, with Magician of Faith and Old Vindictive Magician. Shonen Jump Long Beach is another event where the top 8 is all cows. There is a lot of tech variety to mention though, so a bit of rapid-fire explanations. Starting with the top deck, which was tribute-focused with Air Knight Parshaf and Zaborg the Thunder Monarch, with Treeborn Frog being just about the best tribute fodder for the time, although those Gravekeeper Spies are also a good option. There are not a ton of continuous spell or traps, which helps support Treeborn Frog's self-resurrection effect. But Jar of Greed is a notable trap, which deck thins to make the deck effectively 37 cards. And I am not sure which other card was left out. Maybe it was one of the tech cards from the other top decks, like Sand Moth, which can surprise the opponent with a 2000 attack point monster after Blind Destruction effects. Dark Geroid is similar, able to attack over a larger monster, although the effect is mandatory, so it will shrink itself on an empty board. The combo of Marauding Captain and Sacred Crane is a decent tempo play, but more importantly, a creative and fun card draw option. Gold Woo Lord of the Dark World is a tech card against discard strategies, but at this point it is not quite part of a dedicated Dark World deck. Gravekeeper's Spear Soldier is a decent card for piercing battle damage, and another target for Spy. Swarm of Scarabs is good reoccurring spell and trap removal. And then there is Strike Ninja, which has actually shown up in a few decks at this tournament. This card dodges removal, and removes from play your monsters from the graveyard at the same time. This cost is usually a downside, but Return from the Different Dimension is a major payoff for banished monsters, and contributes greatly to decks like Strike Ninja Return, or much later, Dad Return. But for now, the card is a bit of a taboo, because paying 4,000 life points is a huge cost. Close to Cyberstein's, actually. Moving on to Shonen Jump Orlando, the tournament was also dominated by cows, with a couple flip-flops for flavor. The champion deck has a pair of Kaiko the Ghost Destroyer for graveyard disruption, but it is otherwise pretty run-of-the-mill. On the edge of orthodoxy, this deck runs Mirage Dragon to get around battle traps like Sakuretsu Armor, as well as Injection Fairy Lily, as good battle-based removal or for pushing damage. Finally, the flip-flop deck is dirty, with the Time Seal Mask of Darkness combo. Also interesting is the one-off Twin-Headed Behemoth, which was limited due to ambiguous text, but is still good for absorbing 2 attacks, or leaving a body behind for tribute fodder. Speaking of which, Thestalos the Fire Monarch is another dirty card with a combination of discard and conditional burn damage. Continuing through April, there were the standard cows, a couple flip-flops, but the top deck was unique, a Magical Explosion OTK deck. Magical Explosion is obviously the key card in the deck, and is the deck's only win condition, although the Toon Cannon Soldier and Stray Lambs offer a bit of burn damage potential. Mostly, Toon Cannon Soldier is there for a target for Toon Table of Contents, which can deck thin and dump spells into the graveyard. The deck is not concerned with card advantage as much as card selection, so there is quite an ensemble of cards to get to Magical Explosion. Magical Mallet, Reload, and Card Destruction all offer mulligans, but at the cost of -1 in card advantage. Different Dimension Capsule can search the card directly. Meanwhile, A Feather of the Phoenix, Spell Reproduction, and Dark Magician of Chaos can recycle key spells. Demok is also the other target for Monster Gate and Reasoning, which can milk quite a few spells in the process of getting to a valid monster target. Do note that the tokens generated from Stray Lambs or Goat tokens can be tributed for Monster Gate. Messenger of Peace and Nightmare Steel Cage are good defensive spells, restricting the battle phase, and there is even a unique tech card with Magical Reflector to protect the continuous spell cards. To be frank, this deck is degenerate, non-interactive, and with a binary win condition. It is not healthy for the game, and I am glad Magical Explosion is limited, although it should probably be banned already. Switching focus to one of the flip-flop decks for a moment, Night Assailant is a bit of monster removal and flip effect recursion, but otherwise the deck is pretty standard. Standing out from the standard cows are a few distinct tech choices though. Like how this deck incorporates my favorite card, My Body as a Shield, to negate destruction effects. Big Shield Gardna also has some inherent protection, stopping targeting effects while the card is face down. This card is quite strong defensively, but will shift itself to attack position after damage calculation. The card is very well balanced and is a good target for reinforcement of the army, but based on that downside, I understand why it does not see more play. Skellingle is different, offering card draw like Dekoichi, the battle-chanted locomotive, on a weaker body, but offering the important light attribute for Chaos decks, like this one with triple Chaos Sorcerer. Return from the Different Dimension is also making another appearance, but mass special summoning from the Banished Zone is still underappreciated at the time. Chaos Sorcerer has the attribute and attack requirement for Deck Devastation Virus, which can wipe the opponent's board, discard cards from their hand, and even deny drawing cards for the next 3 turns. Other targets in the deck are Gold, and of course, Zombira the Dark, which is yet another target for reinforcement of the army. Plus, this monster can be normal summoned without tribute. This is a well thought out and creative pool of targets for Deck Devastation Virus. Des Lacuda is the deck's last significant card in my opinion, offering reoccurring card draw in a slow game, whose value cannot be understated. May has 3 tournaments on record, but the decks are all pretty homogeneous. Stop me if you have heard this one before. Champion of Chicago runs a copy of Jinzo to stand out, but outside of the bit of trap suppression, the deck is nothing not encountered so far. UK Nationals is a larger stage, and supported a few variants of cows, but also another Cyburn deck. The winning cow plays Blade Knight as a decent light attribute beatstick, with a bit of flip effect suppression as well. Mystic Swordsman level 2 serves largely the same function, with both cards being Rhoda targets. Light monster tech was actually pretty prevalent at the event, with another deck opting to run a full playset of Shining Angels, which, by the way, is alongside a playset of Mystic Tomato, and I think that is just great representation. Also notable is the single copy of Freed the Brave Wanderer, which is a fair monster removal option, but also loads up the Banished Zone for Return from the Different Dimension. Peeking out the side deck ahead of schedule, this playset of Giant Germs are a decent option for swarming and burn, but they are offset by the playset of Nimble Momonga, which offers both swarm and healing. This was also in the earlier Cyburn deck, but comes out of the sideboard this time. Another cow, one Columbus, with the odd card being DD Assailant, which, alongside the more standard DD Warrior Lady, offers another option for banishing battle-based removal. The only outstanding card in the flip-flop variant is Morphing Jar, which offers symmetric discard and draw, and can afford a major swing in card advantage when used correctly. I have data from 4 tournaments in June, 2 more of which are national championships. Outside of the first deck running a playset of Chaos Sorcerer and Cyber Dragon, making it pretty aggressive, the Return from the Different Dimension is good for late game recovery or setting up an OTK. Canadian Nationals was topped by a Cyber Cow, which teched in a copy of Cyberstein. More impressively, there is Asura Priest and Creature Swap. Combining with Mystic Tomato, you can steal an opponent's monster and special summon a weak dark monster from your deck. The triple gold continues the dark theme, which even carries into the side deck with Deck Devastation Virus, and even weirder, Blowback Dragon for a not so reliable removal option. I like it. Another deck labeled Overload Fusion, which does not have the card Overload Fusion in the deck, also plays Blowback Dragon. SJC Atlanta was topped by another unnoteworthy Chaos deck, although another topping cow had a couple weird tech choices. Newdoria is 1-for-1 monster removal, which is always good, and Fairy Box is an exciting battle phase disruption tool, which comes with a relatively low upkeep cost. The topping Cyberstein deck actually ran a good number of burn cards as well, especially in the side deck, which is a good plan B, but there was a more novel burn deck in the tournament as well. This Life Equalizer deck only runs a single burn card, namely Blasting the Ruins. The strategy is to get to an 8,000 life point deficit compared to your opponent, then deal 3,000 damage in one burst. The main play of the deck is to have Archfiend's Oath and Convulsion of Nature out at the same time to pay 500 life points to draw a card. Royal Magical Library is also essential card draw, with the bulk of the deck being deck-thinning spells to fuel the library. Toon World actually serves a purpose beyond being the Toon Table of Contents target, because paying 1,000 life points helps you to get to that 8,000 life point difference. The same goes for Card Shuffle, to get a bad card off of the top of the deck, but also an option to pay more life points. This deck is also degenerate, but I like knowing that Convulsion of Nature saw competitive success. Maybe that is why people forfeit a match at the first sight of the card on Dueling Book. Finishing up June, the US Nationals was another event with a full showing of cows. There might be a little repetition in this video. At least the side deck is sort of a remix of tech cards, and Threatening Roar is new, preventing the battle phase for a turn at the cost of -1 in card advantage. SJC Philadelphia in July was filled with variants of Chaos or Warrior staple decks, with the top deck having a combination of Creature Swap and Mystic Tomato or Shining Angel for sneaky monster stealing. Enemy Controller is also in the mix, which adds more flexibility, being able to tribute to steal or just change battle positions around. As for the flip-flop representation in the event, this specimen innovates with triple Cyberstein to make a Cyberflop deck. Carrying over into August, the growing popularity of Cyberstein creeps into another top deck. Perhaps it's time to finally dub them Cyber Cows. Thankfully, there are a couple decks to break the mold, with this one electing to run Iron Blacksmith Kotetsu, with a surprising target. Although Premature Burial is always strong, Ekibyo Drakmord is such a weird card to see. It is very slow monster removal, but if it succeeds in destroying the monster, is a +1 in card advantage. Remember, this is a time of quite limited spell and trap removal options. In the side deck, Megamorph is another target, but also the after battle banishing Big Bang Shot, which offers a decent boost in attack points and piercing battle damage. Another uncommon tech card is the Battle Floater Giant Rat, to get out Earth monsters from the deck. Notably, another Battle Floater, Pyramid Turtle. Pyramid Turtle also floats into Ryu Koki, which is a good meta read, as so much of the format was populated by warrior or spellcaster type monsters. Ryu Koki does not do much against machines though, and although not an archetype, we have a deck dominated by the machine type. Cyber Dragon and Cyberstein are familiar, but Cyber Phoenix is new. This card prevents targeting of your machines, but also offers an option for card draw when it is destroyed as a result of battle, which is a bit reminiscent of Dekoichi, a card that also saw play in the same deck. As far as removal options, there is Blowback Dragon and Drillroid, with the latter playing a role similar to Mystic Swordsman level 2, although the higher attack points makes Drillroid the superior option in my opinion. Briefly reporting on SJC Indianapolis, there was another Cyber Cow in first place, although it only ran a single copy of Cyberstein, so maybe it should be labeled Diet Cyber Cow. Settling into September, SJC Boston's winning deck techs in Gravekeeper's Spy, but is otherwise pretty standard. Spy was also teched into another Cyber Cow deck. But the removal option and symmetric burn effect of Ring of Destruction is a bit different. Ring of Destruction also saw play in this tournament's Machine deck, which additionally played a copy of Cannon Soldier for more burn damage. Although not quite the Monarch archetype, this deck opts for a total of 6 of the tribute monsters, with a novel ratio between Mobius, Thestalos, and Zaborg, forming the trio of spell and trap removal, discard and burn, and targeting monster removal. Monarchs also topped SJC Anaheim, this time running triple Thestalos and triple Zaborg. To empower the tribute monsters, Brain Control is a good option to take your opponent's best monster and tribute it, and at the cost of just 800 life points, is less expensive than forfeiting the battle phase for Soul Exchange. Notably in November, a fledgling archetype deck snuck into the top 8, Dark Worlds. The eponymous Dark Worlds are triple gold, double Silva, and double Dark World Lightning. Gold and Silva are easy special summons from hand, and offer additional disruption options if your opponent causes you to discard them. Dark World Lightning is okay face down removal, but is mainly there to enable the other 2 Dark World monsters, which are not only decent bodies on board, but they are also targets for deck devastation virus. Speaking of which, Giant Orc fits those parameters as well, but the card can also be normal summoned without tribute. Maybe it is just at the level of Engine or Suite, but I do think this is a recognizable archetype being featured in the deck. More obviously based on an archetype is this dedicated DD deck, which plays 2 limited familiar faces, but adds triple DD Survivor and DD Scout Plane, which keep coming back from the Banish Zone. Triple Banisher of the Radiance, Dimensional Fissure, and a single Macrocosmos help to banish monsters from the field, notably for DD's Survivor's effect. But the downside of Big Bang Shot actually comes in handy in this deck as well. I cannot figure out how Dark Necrofear fits into the deck, but I can explain the Immortal of the Thunder, which is used to gain 3,000 life points, and since it is banished instead of going to the graveyard, the loss of 5,000 life points is prevented. This is a very strong anti-meta deck. On the other hand, this deck titled The Machine has a fantastic name, but does little to otherwise differentiate itself from other aforementioned Cyberstein decks. But I do like this cheeky Rush Recklessly, which made its way into another Warrior deck. The last event for this video is SJC San Jose, which, if I am not mistaken, is the last event Cyberstein was legal for, and it definitely made an impact, with a Cyberstein deck coming in first place. Additionally, 2 small innovations found their way into the event's Monarch decks. Snipe Hunter is discard to destroy removal, although the odds being in your favor is still not terribly reliable. The other Monarch deck opts for Granmarg the Rock Monarch, which can destroy set cards specifically, making the card a bit narrow. Finally, 2 different variants of Chain Burn placed in the top 8, and I am going to go into more detail because this is the first appearance of that type of burn deck. The 2 cards in the deck which care about chain links are Chain Strike and Accumulated Fortune. Chain Strike gets stronger the higher the number chain link when it is activated, and when chain link 4 or higher, Accumulated Fortune is similar to Pot of Greed. Even at the end of a long chain, Chain Strike is not enough to deal 8,000 damage. So there are a few burn cards like Mechadog Marin, Tremendous Fire, Just Desserts, Secret Barrel, and Poison of the Old Man, with the last 3 significant as they can be chain links 2 and higher. Beyond that, the deck is all draw and stall, although the single copy of Dimension Wall is both stall and burn. The other Chain Burn deck runs 3 copies of Dimension Wall for the same reason. Other notable burn cards are Meteor of Destruction and Wave Motion Cannon, with the second card acting as a secondary win condition. There are also quite a few cards for the purpose of stalling, specifically by turning off the battle phase: Threatening Roar, Thunder of Ruler, and Wabaku. These cards help to soften the downside of Lava Golem giving your opponent a 3,000 attack point monster. Chain Burn is not fun to play against, and I do not recommend playing it, so this is not an endorsement, but I appreciate the variety at least. To summarize the 2006 metagame, I would say that this is 2005 Part 2. There are a few innovations and a few rogue decks which do not fit into the standard Chaos and Warrior staple decks, but there is not a lot of variety. Many of the side deck tech options from 2005 have been incorporated into the main deck. That being said, there are a few distinguishing cards in the sideboard worth mentioning. This is more question and answer, strategy and counter strategies at play, with the big ones still being discard effects. On top of the traditional elephant statue of disaster, gold and silver are very popular choices. As a counter strategy though, DD Designator saw play as a banishing version of Mind Crush, although only at spell speed 1. Mask of Restrict is a pretty solid counter to the growing number of Monarch decks. Double Snare is a super narrow counter to Jinzo and Royal Decree, while Solemn Judgment is the opposite end of the spectrum, negating most cards. Mind Control is a little before its prime, but it's still a decent disruption tool. Side decking into a Cyberstein OTK strategy was also very common, and Cold Wave shuts down spells and traps for a turn to help further enable the OTK. Being a little weird, there are a couple cards to gain life points, like Mystic Walk and Granadora, but then there is a whole nother category of odd cards that I do not understand. Saber Beetle and White Ninja are more anti-face down tech. Ancient Lamp is not being used to bring out Logen the mystical genie of the lamp, but instead to act like magical arm shield. Big Eye, no, not that one, is good card selection, although it is slow and does not offer material card advantage. Hino Kagusuchi does offer material card advantage by discarding your opponent's entire hand. Then there is Self-Destruct button, which is not a healthy card for the game, and I am glad it got banned in the TCG at least. At this point, I am caught up to the History of the Ban List series, so in the future, these supplements will be released between Part 1 and 2 of the year's ban list videos, or following the TCG OCG list divergence before the TCG video is released. So the next video in the playlist will be History of the Ban List 2007 Part 1, then the 2007 Competitive Overview, then HTB 2007 Part 2. These videos take quite a long time to make, so it might be a little while before the next overview video comes out. That being said, since Cyberstein was banned right before 2007, the year started off with a bang, and I am excited to show off more deck diversity in the future.